For 18 long years, the Loumbila seed farm stood as a symbol of unrealized potential. Built to help strengthen Burkina Faso's agricultural future, the site gradually lost much of its usefulness when reliable irrigation became unavailable. Year after year, farmers watched fertile land remain underused, waiting for a solution that never seemed to come. What made the situation even more frustrating was that everyone understood the importance of the farm. It was not just another agricultural project. It was a strategic source of quality seeds that could help thousands of producers improve their harvests. Then something changed. No, under the leadership of Captain IbrahimTraore, the long period of waiting finally came to an end. Water returned to the fields of Loumbila, opening the door to year-round production and giving new life to a site that many feared would never regain its former importance. But this story is about much more than irrigation pipes and pumping stations. It is about a nation attempting to build its future through its own efforts, its own resources, and its own determination. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel because stories like this reveal how real development is taking shape across Africa in ways that often receive little international attention. The history of Loumbila stretches back decades. The reservoir that supplies the area was created in 1947, while the seed farm itself was established in 1975. In 2001, it received official recognition as a seed production farm by the Food and Agriculture Organization. For years, it played an important role in supporting agricultural production. However, by 2008, the lack of adequate irrigation infrastructure had severely limited operations. Farmers could only work effectively during the rainy season, leaving valuable land idle for much of the year. What was once a promising agricultural asset slowly became an example of how infrastructure neglect can prevent a country from fully benefiting from its own resources. Burkina Faso's agricultural sector sits at the center of the nation's economy and the daily lives of millions of citizens. For decades, agriculture has provided employment and income for the majority of the population. Yet, despite its importance, the sector has faced enormous challenges that have limited its ability to fully meet the country's food needs. One of the greatest obstacles has been the heavy dependence on rainfall. In many parts of Burkina Faso, agricultural success depends almost entirely on whether the rainy season arrives on time and delivers enough water. When rains are delayed or insufficient, harvests suffer. Entire communities can find themselves facing uncertainty about food supplies and income. Climate change has made these challenges even more difficult. Rising temperatures, irregular rainfall patterns, and longer periods of drought have increased the risks faced by farmers. A single poor season can affect thousands of families and reduce production across entire regions. In such conditions, relying only on natural rainfall becomes increasingly dangerous. At the same time, security challenges in several parts of the country have disrupted agricultural activities. Some farming communities have been displaced, while others have struggled to maintain normal production levels. These pressures have placed additional strain on food systems that were already vulnerable. As a result, Burkina Faso has often faced difficult questions about food security. How can a nation strengthen its agricultural independence when weather conditions are unpredictable? How can farmers increase production while facing environmental and security pressures? The answer increasingly points toward greater investment in agricultural infrastructure, irrigation systems, and quality seed production. This is precisely why the revival of Loumbila matters so much. The project is not simply about restoring one farm, it addresses some of the most fundamental challenges facing Burkina Faso. Reliable water supplies and high-quality seeds provide farmers with tools that reduce uncertainty and increase productivity. In a country where agriculture remains essential to national stability, Such investments represent more than economic projects. They become strategic instruments for building resilience, strengthening food security, and creating a more self-reliant future. The revival of Loumbila cannot be fully understood without examining the broader vision that has emerged under Captain IbrahimTraore. For many observers, the restoration of a seed farm may appear to be a local development project, yet within Burkina Faso, it represents something much larger. It reflects a growing belief that national sovereignty begins with the ability of a country to feed itself. Since coming to power, Ibrahim Traore has consistently emphasized the importance of economic independence and domestic production. His message has been simple but powerful. A nation that depends heavily on others for essential needs can never exercise complete control over its future. This philosophy extends beyond politics and security. It reaches into agriculture, industry, education, and resource management. In many ways, this approach echoes ideas that were promoted decades earlier by Thomas Sankara. Sankara argued that African nations should rely on their own capacities rather than remain dependent on external assistance. While the circumstances of today are different, the underlying principle remains familiar. Development must be built on local strengths and local production. Loumbila fits perfectly within this vision. Rather than creating an entirely new project from scratch, the government focused on restoring an existing national asset that had been neglected for years. This approach sends an important message. Progress does not always require expensive new initiatives. Sometimes it begins by identifying valuable resources that already exist and ensuring they function properly. The project also reflects a shift from short-term solutions toward long-term productive capacity. Instead of simply addressing immediate food shortages, the goal is to strengthen the foundations of agricultural production itself. Water infrastructure, quality seeds, and organized farming cooperatives create conditions that can continue generating results for years to come. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, Loumbila demonstrates what can happen when political priorities are aligned with practical needs. The farm's recovery is not merely about increasing agricultural output. It symbolizes a broader effort to transform Burkina Faso from a nation struggling with recurring vulnerabilities into one capable of producing more of what its people need. In that sense, the water flowing once again through Loumbila's fields represents more than irrigation. It represents a vision of self-reliance taking shape on the ground. The transformation of Loumbila became visible the moment water began flowing through the newly completed irrigation system. After 18 years of limited operations, the farm suddenly gained something it had lacked for nearly 2 decades, the ability to produce throughout the entire year. The scale of the project is significant. The irrigated area covers 60 hectares and has been divided into 240 plots that will be managed by agricultural cooperatives. Water is supplied from the Loumbila reservoir through a pumping station equipped with 3 motor pumps. A network of canals and distribution infrastructure now ensures that water can reach fields that previously depended almost entirely on seasonal rainfall. For local farmers, this development changes everything. Instead of waiting for the rainy season to begin planting, they can now organize production schedules more effectively and take advantage of multiple growing cycles. Officials estimate that the site will be capable of producing approximately 48.5 tons of quality seeds each season. Those seeds will support farmers far beyond Loumbila itself, helping improve agricultural productivity across wider regions of Burkina Faso. During the inauguration ceremony, government officials emphasized that the project is not simply an engineering achievement, it is a strategic investment in the future of national agriculture. Minister of Economy Abubakar Nakanabo stressed that quality seeds form the foundation of agricultural success. Without reliable seeds, Even fertile land and favorable weather cannot guarantee strong harvests. Captain Ismail Sambi also delivered a clear message to beneficiaries. He reminded farmers that the infrastructure had required substantial public investment, and that protecting it would be essential. The long-awaited return of water created tremendous opportunities, but those opportunities could only be sustained through responsible management and collective discipline. What makes the Loumbila project particularly remarkable is that it converts an underutilized resource into a productive asset. For years, the farm represented unrealized potential. Today, it stands as evidence that targeted investments in infrastructure can unlock economic opportunities that have been dormant for decades. The return of water has not simply revived fields. It has revived confidence, expectations, and the possibility of a more productive agricultural future. Many people hear about irrigation systems and seed farms without fully understanding why they are so important. Yet, throughout history, agricultural transformations have often begun with one simple factor: better seeds. Long before modern machinery or advanced technologies, farmers discovered that the quality of what they planted determined much of what they harvested. This reality remains true in Burkina Faso today. Quality seeds are the foundation of productive agriculture. They influence crop yields, resistance to disease, tolerance to environmental stress, and overall food production. Even when farmers have access to land and water, poor quality seeds can severely limit results. Conversely, improved seeds can significantly increase productivity without requiring additional farmland. That is why the restoration of Loumbila carries such strategic value. The farm is expected to produce approximately 48.5 tons of seeds each season. These seeds are not intended solely for local use. They are part of a broader effort to strengthen agricultural production throughout the country. The importance of this goal becomes even clearer when viewed within the framework of Burkina Faso's offensive agro-pastoral and fisheries initiative. This national strategy seeks to expand food production, improve agricultural resilience, and reduce dependence on external supplies. Achieving those objectives requires more than ambitious speeches. It requires reliable inputs that farmers can depend on year after year. Seeds represent one of those critical inputs. By increasing the availability of high-quality seeds, Loumbila helps create a multiplier effect throughout the agricultural sector. Better seeds support stronger harvests. Stronger harvests improve food security. Improved food security strengthens economic stability and reduces vulnerability to external shocks. For this reason, the return of water to Loumbila should not be viewed as the final achievement. It is the beginning of a process. The true success of the project will be measured in the growing number of farmers who gain access to better seeds and the increasing ability of Burkina Faso to feed itself through its own production. As the Loumbila project gained attention, it also attracted criticism from some observers outside Burkina Faso. This reaction was not surprising. Major development initiatives often become part of larger debates about politics, governance, and national priorities. In the case of Burkina Faso, some critics questioned whether projects like Loumbila would remain sustainable over the long term. Others suggested that such achievements were being highlighted primarily for political purposes. However, the strongest response to these criticisms comes not from speeches, but from results. For 18 years, the farm struggled to operate at full capacity. Today, it has access to irrigation, organized production plots, pumping infrastructure, and the ability to support year-round cultivation. These are measurable changes, not theoretical promises. The voices of local farmers provide another important perspective. For many beneficiaries, the project represents the difference between seasonal production and continuous agricultural activity. Their focus is not on international political debates. Their focus is on whether water reaches their fields and whether they can improve their livelihoods. This does not mean every concern should be dismissed. Long-term maintenance, effective management, and continued investment will remain essential. Yet the experience of Loumbila demonstrates an important principle. Development projects should ultimately be judged by their impact on people's lives. When farmers gain new opportunities, when production increases, and when communities become more resilient, those outcomes provide a powerful answer to skepticism. 18 years of waiting finally came to an end at Loumbila. For nearly 2 decades, a valuable agricultural asset remained unable to reach its full potential because of one fundamental limitation: the lack of reliable water. Today, that reality has changed. Water flows through the irrigation network. Farmers can cultivate throughout the year, and a seed farm once restricted to seasonal production has been given a new future. Yet the importance of Loumbila extends far beyond 60 hectares of land. The project demonstrates what can happen when a nation chooses to invest directly in productive capacity rather than depend entirely on external solutions. By restoring irrigation, improving access to quality seeds, and supporting cooperative farming, Burkina Faso is strengthening the foundations of long-term food security. The lessons reach beyond national borders. Many African countries possess fertile land, hard-working farmers, and untapped resources. What often limits progress is not a lack of potential, but a lack of infrastructure, organization, and sustained commitment. Loumbila shows that meaningful change can begin by restoring neglected assets and placing local production at the center of development policy. For many supporters, this achievement reflects the broader vision promoted by Ibrahim Traore. It is a vision that emphasizes self-reliance, productive investment, and confidence in the abilities of African people. In that sense, Loumbila has become more than a seed farm. It has become a symbol of an Africa new that seeks growth through its own efforts and its own resources. Its story resonates with the ideals of Pan-African cooperation, the aspirations of the African Union, and the enduring principles of Pan-Africanism. Whether viewed through the lens of agriculture, economic development, or national renewal, Loumbila offers an example of what is possible when determination is matched by action. As Burkina Faso continues this journey under Captain IbrahimTraore, many across Africa will be watching closely. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the transformation taking place across the continent. For years, the world has associated Burkina Faso with military coups, terrorism, and political instability. International headlines often focus on conflict, security crises, and foreign influence. Yet, while much of the world watches the battlefield, Captain IbrahimTraore appears to be focusing on something far less dramatic but potentially far more important. Water, not gold, not foreign aid, not international loans. Water. What if the future of a nation does not begin with political speeches, but with reservoirs, irrigation systems, and productive farmland? What if the most powerful tool for national sovereignty is not a weapon, but the ability to feed your own people? That is the question at the center of one of the most ambitious projects unfolding in Africa today. While many African countries continue spending billions of dollars importing food, Burkina Faso is pursuing a different path. IbrahimTraore is investing in water infrastructure with the goal of increasing agricultural production, creating jobs, and reducing dependence on external support. Today, we will explore why this strategy could become a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but also for the wider African continent. If you enjoy thoughtful discussions about Africa's future and the leaders shaping it, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community. To understand why this project matters, we must first understand the challenge it is trying to solve. Africa possesses roughly 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. It has fertile soil, millions of farmers, and enormous agricultural potential. Yet many African nations still spend vast amounts of money importing food every year. This creates an important question. How can a continent with so much agricultural potential struggle to feed itself? The answer is not a lack of land or labor. In many cases, the real problem is infrastructure. Without reliable systems to capture, store, and distribute water, agricultural production remains limited. And when production remains limited, dependence on food imports continues. If Ibrahim Traore's water strategy appears unusual today, it is because it challenges how many governments have approached development for decades. When countries face food shortages, the most common response is often food imports, foreign assistance, or temporary support programs. While these measures may ease immediate pressure, they rarely solve the underlying problem. Traore appears to be following a different path. Instead of asking how Burkina Faso can purchase more food, he is asking how Burkina Faso can produce more food. That simple shift in thinking may be the foundation of his entire development strategy. At the center of this strategy is a powerful chain of cause and effect. Water supports production. Production generates income. Income creates jobs. Jobs strengthen communities. Strong communities support national stability, and stability helps protect sovereignty. This is why water has become such a strategic priority. For many years, farmers across Burkina Faso depended heavily on seasonal rainfall. Their harvests often rose or fell based on weather conditions beyond their control. A weak rainy season could reduce production. A drought could threaten livelihoods and local food supplies. Under those conditions, farming becomes uncertain. Traore's approach seeks to reduce that uncertainty. Reliable water supplies allow farmers to plan ahead. They can cultivate more land, extend growing seasons, and improve productivity. Greater productivity can increase household income and support local economic activity. This idea also changes the way sovereignty is understood. Many people associate sovereignty with military strength, borders, or political independence. Those factors matter. However, economic independence is equally important. A nation that depends heavily on imported food remains vulnerable to external shocks and rising global prices. A nation that can feed itself gains greater control over its future. That appears to be the larger objective behind Traore's strategy. He is not simply investing in water infrastructure. He is attempting to build the foundations of long-term self-reliance and national resilience. The vision behind Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is no longer just an idea. It is being translated into physical infrastructure across Burkina Faso. One of the most significant elements of this strategy is the nationwide effort to restore and expand water storage capacity. Rather than focusing only on building new projects, the government has also launched an ambitious program to rehabilitate existing dams that have gradually lost effectiveness over time. Many reservoirs across the country have suffered from sediment accumulation, reducing their ability to store water during the rainy season. As capacity declines, farmers have less access to water during dry periods, limiting agricultural production and economic activity. To address this challenge, Burkina Faso has introduced a plan to rehabilitate approximately 100 dams across the country. The objective is not simply to repair aging infrastructure. The larger goal is to strengthen the country's ability to capture, store, and distribute water more efficiently. Another major development has been the creation of the National Office for Dams and Hydro-Agricultural Development, known as ONBAH. The establishment of ONBAH represents an important shift in approach. Large development projects often fail when they depend entirely on political promises. Governments change, priorities shift, and projects lose momentum. By creating a dedicated institution, Burkina Faso is attempting to transform a political vision into a long-term national program. This may be one of the most important aspects of Traore's strategy. Infrastructure alone does not create transformation. Institutions create continuity. The mission of ONBA extends beyond construction. The agency is responsible for coordinating dam rehabilitation, supporting irrigation expansion, improving water management, and helping create conditions for increased agricultural production. For the first time in many years, Burkina Faso appears to be building a coordinated framework designed to turn water into a strategic national asset rather than a seasonal opportunity. The creation of ONBA was only the beginning. For a strategy of this scale to succeed, institutions must be supported by resources, equipment, and execution. That is why Burkina Faso has invested heavily in machinery and technical capacity to accelerate dam rehabilitation and hydro-agricultural development. The government understands that ambitious plans alone cannot transform an economy. Real change requires the ability to move from policy discussions to visible results on the ground. This investment reflects a broader objective. Burkina Faso is not attempting to build a few isolated water projects. It is trying to create a national system capable of supporting agricultural growth across multiple regions. But why does this matter so much? Because a dam is far more than a concrete structure. Stored water becomes productive farmland. Productive farmland becomes harvests. Harvests become income. Income creates economic activity throughout local communities. When irrigation expands, farmers gain opportunities to cultivate crops beyond the traditional rainy season. Land that once remained unused during dry months can continue generating value throughout the year. The impact extends far beyond agriculture itself. Higher production creates opportunities for traders, transport operators, food processors, market vendors, and small business owners. As money circulates through local economies, entire communities benefit from increased economic activity. This is why many local residents view these projects with optimism. They are not celebrating engineering achievements alone. They are celebrating the possibility of greater opportunity. For many young people, the greatest challenge is not a lack of ambition. It is a lack of economic options. When communities can generate income locally, fewer people feel compelled to leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. In that sense, water becomes more than a resource. It becomes a tool for job creation, community development, and economic empowerment. And that may be exactly what makes this strategy so important for Burkina Faso's future. The economic benefits of water infrastructure extend beyond higher agricultural production. They also influence social stability in ways that are often overlooked. When people have access to work, they gain more than income. They gain confidence, purpose, and a stronger connection to their communities. Families are better able to plan for the future, invest in education, and improve their quality of life. This is particularly important for young people. Across many parts of Africa, one of the greatest challenges is not a shortage of talent or ambition. It is the shortage of opportunities. When jobs are scarce and economic prospects appear limited, many young people feel pressured to leave their communities in search of a better future. Some move to cities. Others leave their countries entirely. As a result, rural communities often lose valuable workers and experience slower economic development. This is where Traore's water strategy takes on a broader significance. By supporting agricultural growth and local economic activity, water infrastructure can help create conditions that encourage people to remain and invest in their own communities. The connection between development and security is often underestimated. Most discussions about national security focus on military operations, weapons, and border protection. These elements are important. However, long-term stability also depends on whether citizens believe they have a future worth protecting. Communities with jobs, businesses, and productive farmland tend to be more resilient than communities facing persistent economic hardship. This does not mean dams can solve every security challenge facing Burkina Faso. They cannot, but they can help address some of the underlying economic pressures that contribute to instability. That may be why Traore's strategy is attracting attention across Africa. While many leaders focus primarily on immediate crises, Burkina Faso appears to be investing in conditions that could support long-term stability. In this vision, water is not only a development resource, it is also part of a larger strategy to strengthen the nation from the ground up. Not everyone views Ibrahim Traore's strategy through the same lens. In much of the Western media, discussions about Burkina Faso often focus on political issues, military rule, democratic concerns, and security challenges. Critics argue that long-term development requires strong institutions, political accountability, and respect for civil liberties in addition to economic reforms. These concerns deserve consideration. No country can achieve lasting progress through infrastructure projects alone. Economic development, political stability, effective governance, and public trust must work together. At the same time, supporters of Traore argue that an important part of the story is frequently overlooked. While international attention often centers on political controversies, Burkina Faso is also investing in agriculture, water management, and productive infrastructure. From this perspective, the country's efforts to strengthen food production and reduce dependence on imports deserve serious examination. A balanced assessment requires avoiding both extremes. Traore should not be portrayed as a flawless leader capable of solving every challenge facing Burkina Faso. But neither should every development initiative be dismissed because of political disagreements. The most useful question is not whether people support or oppose Traore personally. The real question is whether these projects produce measurable results. Will farmers have greater access to water? Will food production increase? Will rural incomes improve? Will communities become more resilient over time? Those are the indicators that will ultimately determine success or failure. Years from now, observers may look beyond today's political debates and focus on a simpler question. Did Burkina Faso become stronger, more productive, and more self-reliant because of these investments? That is the test that matters most. As we reach the end of this story, one thing becomes clear. The real significance of Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is not the dams themselves. It is the vision behind them. For decades, discussions about development in Africa have often focused on aid, loans, and external support. Burkina Faso is attempting to explore a different path. Instead of concentrating solely on consumption, it is investing in the ability to produce. That is why water matters. Water supports agriculture. Agriculture supports livelihoods. Livelihoods support stability. And stability creates the conditions for genuine sovereignty. Whether this strategy ultimately succeeds remains uncertain. The dams must continue operating. Irrigation systems must expand. Farmers must increase production. Communities must experience measurable improvements in their daily lives. Those outcomes will determine the true legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Yet, regardless of the final results, an important conversation has already begun. Can African nations strengthen their future by investing more heavily in productive infrastructure? Can food security become a central pillar of national sovereignty? Can the ideals of Pan-Africanism be translated into practical policies that improve the lives of ordinary citizens? These questions extend far beyond Burkina Faso. They matter to the African Union, to advocates of a Pan-African future, and to everyone interested in what many describe as an Africa new era of self-reliance and development. Perhaps that is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore continue attracting attention across the continent. The future will reveal whether this vision delivers lasting change. But for now, Burkina Faso is offering a powerful idea. A nation becomes stronger when it can feed, employ, and empower its own people. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe and join us for future discussions. While many African nations still wait for food shipments and foreign aid to survive difficult seasons, something very different is quietly happening inside Burkina Faso. In a country often described by international headlines as poor, unstable, and dangerous, Captain IbrahimTraore is focusing on something most powerful nations rarely talk about anymore: water, soil, farmers, food. At first glance, restoring old dams may not sound revolutionary. There are no luxury skyscrapers, no billion-dollar technology parks, and no glamorous international conferences. But for millions of ordinary Africans, especially those living in rural communities, water is life itself. A dam is not just concrete. It is survival during the dry season. It is food during difficult months. It is protection against hunger, poverty, and displacement. For decades, many African countries became trapped in a cycle of dependence. Despite having fertile land and millions of hardworking farmers, they continued importing food from abroad while accepting aid packages from Western governments and international organizations. The system kept many countries alive, but it rarely helped them stand on their own feet. When global crises happened, African families suffered first. The Russia-Ukraine war exposed this reality even more clearly. Food prices exploded across Africa. Fertilizer became expensive. Wheat imports slowed down. Suddenly, countries that depended heavily on foreign food realized how vulnerable they truly were. But instead of waiting for another shipment or another international promise, Burkina Faso began looking inward. IbrahimTraore started speaking about food sovereignty, local production, and national dignity. His government began restoring neglected dams, expanding irrigation systems, and helping farmers continue working year-round. And that may be exactly why the world is paying attention. If you believe Africa can rise through its own labor, resources, and determination, subscribe to the channel and continue following these stories that are reshaping the future of the continent. For many people outside Burkina Faso, these old dams may look like forgotten pieces of infrastructure from another era. Some were built decades ago, during the 1960s and 70s, when leaders believed water systems could help protect communities from drought and food shortages. But over time, many of these dams were neglected, polluted, and slowly swallowed by mud and waste. In Ouagadougou and surrounding regions, years of sediment buildup reduced the storage capacity of several major reservoirs. Plastic waste, untreated garbage, and uncontrolled farming practices began choking the waterways. During heavy rains, the dams could no longer properly contain water, increasing the risk of flooding across nearby communities. During dry seasons, farmers struggled because there was not enough water left for irrigation. The environmental damage became impossible to ignore. Fish populations disappeared from some areas. Water quality dropped sharply because of pesticides and pollution. Farmers who depended on these water systems found themselves trapped between drought and uncertainty. Many young people abandoned agriculture completely because farming no longer looked like a future worth fighting for. What made the situation even more painful was that these dams were once symbols of hope. They were built to help communities survive difficult climates. They were meant to support food production and economic stability. Instead, they became symbols of neglect and broken systems. For years, governments discussed development, while basic infrastructure continued collapsing quietly in the background. Roads and politics dominated public conversation, but reservoirs, canals, and irrigation systems received little attention. That is why the restoration projects under IbrahimTraore are attracting so much attention today. Burkina Faso is not simply cleaning old dams. It is trying to recover something far more important. The country is trying to restore its ability to feed itself, protect its farmers, and preserve the foundation of rural life before it disappears completely. What IbrahimTraore understands is that no country can speak proudly about independence while depending on others to feed its population. That is why his government is treating agriculture and water management as matters of national security rather than secondary economic issues. Instead of focusing only on speeches and political slogans, Burkina Faso has started launching large-scale restoration projects across damaged reservoirs and irrigation systems. Old dams are being dredged to remove years of accumulated mud and waste. Water channels are being repaired. Irrigation systems are being expanded so farmers can continue producing food during dry seasons instead of relying entirely on rainfall. To some observers, these projects may appear simple, but for rural communities, the impact is enormous. A functioning reservoir means farmers can grow vegetables throughout the year. It means families can earn stable income. It means fewer young people abandoning villages because agriculture has become impossible. IbrahimTraore has repeatedly linked food production to national dignity. His message is clear. A nation that cannot feed itself will always remain vulnerable to foreign pressure, global crises, and economic dependence. That philosophy strongly connects with Pan-Africanism and the legacy of leaders like Thomas Sankara, who also believed Africa must rely on its own people and resources. Across Burkina Faso, many supporters now see these dam restoration projects as more than infrastructure programs. They see them as symbols of recovery. Every canal cleaned, every borehole drilled, and every irrigation system repaired becomes proof that the country is trying to build from the ground up instead of waiting for outside rescue. This is one reason IbrahimTraore continues gaining attention across Africa. While many leaders speak about development in abstract terms, he is focusing on practical systems that directly affect ordinary lives. Water for farmers, land for production, stability for rural families. And in a continent where food insecurity still affects millions, that approach carries enormous political and emotional power. One reason many people inside Burkina Faso continue supporting these agricultural reforms is because the government is not simply removing farmers from damaged areas and leaving them without options. In several regions where authorities needed to clear people away from old reservoirs and waterways, new solutions were introduced at the same time. Boreholes were drilled so farming communities could still access water during restoration work. New agricultural zones were prepared to allow displaced market gardeners to continue growing crops. Water storage tanks and irrigation systems were installed to help communities farm throughout the entire year instead of depending only on seasonal rain. For ordinary citizens, these actions carry deep meaning. Many African communities are used to hearing promises during political speeches, but receiving very little practical support afterward. Here, people are seeing direct intervention that affects daily survival. They see water systems being repaired. They see farming land being protected. They see communities receiving tools to continue working instead of becoming dependent on aid. The impact is especially important for women and vulnerable families. In many rural parts of Burkina Faso, women are heavily involved in food production and local markets. When water becomes scarce, women and children often suffer first. Stable irrigation and nearby water access reduce that burden and improve household stability. These projects also matter for internally displaced families who fled violence and insecurity in different parts of the country. Agriculture creates opportunities for income, food production, and community rebuilding. In difficult environments, even small farming programs can restore dignity and hope. That is why many supporters of Ibrahim Traore describe these projects as more than economic reforms. They believe the government is trying to rebuild trust between the state and ordinary citizens. Instead of treating farmers as forgotten rural populations, Burkina Faso is increasingly presenting them as essential to national survival and long-term independence. Western governments and international media often criticize Ibrahim Traore and the military leadership in Burkina Faso. They raise concerns about democracy, press freedom, and the concentration of political power. Some foreign observers argue that military governments cannot provide long-term stability or economic progress for African nations. Those concerns are not completely without reason. Burkina Faso still faces enormous security challenges. Armed violence continues affecting several regions. Poverty remains widespread, and many infrastructure projects will require years before their full impact can be measured. Restoring dams alone will not magically solve every national problem. However, many supporters of Ibrahim Traore believe Western criticism sometimes ignores an important reality. For decades, countries across Africa followed political models encouraged by foreign powers while still remaining economically dependent and vulnerable to food insecurity. Elections were held, international conferences were organized, and development promises were repeated. Yet many rural communities still lacked reliable water systems and stable agricultural support. That is why Burkina Faso's current direction creates discomfort for some international actors. The concern is not only about politics, it is also about the possibility that another model could inspire other African nations. If Burkina Faso succeeds in improving food production through local infrastructure, irrigation, and national self-reliance, other countries may begin asking difficult questions about dependence on imported food and permanent foreign aid. Even critics must acknowledge one important point. Burkina Faso is attempting to rebuild basic national capacity instead of relying entirely on outside solutions. The country is trying to strengthen agriculture from the ground up, beginning with water, land, and farmers themselves. And whether one agrees with Ibrahim Traore or not, that effort is changing the conversation across Africa. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore often admit that Burkina Faso is still far from becoming a fully stable or wealthy nation. The country continues facing armed conflict, economic pressure, climate challenges, and limited financial resources. Building a self-sufficient agricultural system in such conditions is extremely difficult, and there is no guarantee of immediate success. Critics also argue that political reforms, democratic institutions, and freedom of expression remain important concerns that cannot simply be ignored in the name of national development. These are legitimate debates, and they continue shaping international discussions about Burkina Faso's future. But many ordinary Africans are looking at the situation from a different perspective. They are asking a simpler question. After decades of foreign influence, aid programs, and imported development models, why are so many communities still struggling to secure food, water, and economic stability? That question is one reason Ibrahim Traore's message resonates far beyond Burkina Faso. His supporters see a leader trying to rebuild national confidence from the ground up, not through dependence, but through production, not through endless promises, but through practical infrastructure that directly affects daily life. The restoration of dams alone will not transform Africa overnight, but it represents something symbolic and deeply important. It shows that development may begin with basic systems that many governments ignored for too long: water, farming, rural communities, local production. For many Africans, that approach feels more real than speeches written for international audiences. Burkina Faso is still a small nation facing enormous challenges. It is not the richest country in Africa. It does not control global financial institutions, and it does not possess the political influence of major world powers. Yet, under Captain IbrahimTraore, the country is attempting something many people once believed was impossible. It is trying to build self-reliance from the ground up. The restoration of dams, expansion of irrigation systems, and direct support for farmers may seem simple compared to the grand promises often discussed in international meetings. But for ordinary people, these projects represent survival, dignity, and hope for the future. Across Africa, millions of people are watching closely. They are watching because Burkina Faso is raising an uncomfortable but important question: why should a continent with fertile land, natural resources, and hard-working people remain permanently dependent on imported food and foreign assistance? The answer offered by IbrahimTraore and many supporters of Pan-Africanism is clear. Africa must invest in its own people first. It must protect its farmers, restore its infrastructure, and treat food production as part of national sovereignty. That vision connects deeply with the broader Pan-African movement, and with growing conversations inside the African Union about economic independence and regional self-reliance. No one knows exactly how this story will end. Burkina Faso still faces many risks, and success is far from guaranteed. But one thing is already certain. The conversation is changing. The idea of an Africa new, an Africa capable of feeding and sustaining itself, no longer feels impossible to millions of people across the continent. And perhaps that is why IbrahimTraore has become such a powerful symbol far beyond Burkina Faso itself. If you want to continue following stories about Pan-African change, African resilience, and the future being shaped across the continent, subscribe to the channel and join us again for the next story. What China just delivered to Burkina Faso was not simply a donation worth 160 million CFA francs. It may be the beginning of one of the most important agricultural transformations the Sahel region has seen in decades. At first glance, the announcement sounded like another international aid story. China handed over tractors, seeders, fertilizers, threshers, and agricultural equipment to Burkina Faso in a ceremony held in Ouagadougou. But behind those machines lies something much larger than temporary assistance. This is now the third phase of a long-term agricultural cooperation program between Beijing and Ouagadougou. Since diplomatic relations resumed in 2018, thousands of hectares of rice fields have already been developed. Thousands of agricultural workers have been trained, and Chinese experts are now working directly on the ground to transfer farming technologies to local communities. For Captain IbrahimTraore, agriculture is no longer just about food production. It is about sovereignty. Burkina Faso has spent years struggling with insecurity, poverty, food shortages, and dependence on foreign imports. Now, the government wants to build something different. It wants a nation capable of feeding itself. And that may explain why this partnership matters far beyond the value of 160 million CFA francs, which is roughly $274,000. Because what is happening in Burkina Faso today may not only change farming, It could reshape how many Africans think about independence, development, and economic survival in the years ahead. If you want to understand how Africa is quietly reshaping its future beyond Western influence, make sure to subscribe and stay with us until the end. The agricultural equipment delivered by China may appear modest when compared to billion-dollar infrastructure projects often discussed in international politics. But for many communities in Burkina Faso, these machines could transform everyday life far more directly than major diplomatic announcements ever could. The donation included tractors, motor cultivators, seeders, mowing machines, threshers, seed analysis equipment, fertilizers, and improved seeds. On paper, it is valued at more than 160 million CFA francs, or around $274,000. Yet the true significance of this support lies in what it represents. This was not a one-time humanitarian gesture. It was part of Phase 3 of the Agricultural Cooperation Program between China and Burkina Faso, known as PCA-BF. That detail is critical because it shows long-term planning rather than symbolic diplomacy. For years, many farmers across Burkina Faso relied on manual labor or animal traction to cultivate their land. Harvesting often took too long. Storage systems were weak. Large portions of crops could be lost before reaching markets. In some areas, a lack of machinery limited how much land families could even cultivate during the rainy season. A single tractor may now allow an entire village to prepare fields faster. A seeder can improve planting efficiency. Better threshing equipment can reduce waste after harvest. Improved seeds and fertilizer can increase crop yields in regions already suffering from climate pressure and food insecurity. But perhaps the most important point is this: China is not only sending equipment, it is helping Burkina Faso build productive capacity. That changes the entire meaning of the partnership. Because emergency aid can feed people for a few weeks, but agricultural modernization can feed a nation for generations. For Ibrahim Traore, the agricultural crisis in Burkina Faso is not simply an economic issue. It is a question of national survival and political independence. For many years, Burkina Faso remained heavily dependent on imported food and international assistance. Rural communities struggled with rising fertilizer prices, weak infrastructure, poor irrigation systems, and limited access to modern farming equipment. In some regions, insecurity and violence pushed farmers away from their land altogether. The result was dangerous. Food shortages increased, prices became unstable. Poverty deepened in vulnerable communities, and like many countries across the Sahel, Burkina Faso faced the risk of becoming permanently dependent on external support. That is exactly the situation Ibrahim Traore says he wants to change. Since taking power, Traore has consistently promoted the idea that true sovereignty cannot exist without economic self-reliance. For him, national independence is not only about military strength or political speeches. A country that cannot feed its own people remains vulnerable no matter how many flags it raises. That philosophy explains why agriculture has become one of the central pillars of his national vision. Instead of focusing only on emergency aid, the government is pushing for mechanization, irrigation expansion, improved seed production, and local food systems capable of supporting long-term stability. The goal is clear. Burkina Faso must reduce dependence on foreign imports and strengthen domestic production. This approach also connects strongly with modern Pan-African ideas spreading across parts of West Africa. Many young Africans increasingly believe the continent must stop relying entirely on outside powers for food, technology, and development. And in that context, the tractors arriving from China are no longer just machines. They become symbols of a broader political message, a message that says Africa should not only survive, it should produce, build, and feed itself with dignity. What makes China's involvement in Burkina Faso Different from many traditional aid programs is that Beijing is not focusing only on short-term relief. It is building systems designed to increase long-term production. That distinction matters enormously in a region like the Sahel. Since diplomatic relations between Burkina Faso and China resumed in 2018, cooperation has expanded far beyond simple donations. Thousands of hectares of rice fields have been developed with Chinese technical assistance. Nearly 7,500 agricultural workers and technicians have reportedly received training. Chinese specialists are now working directly inside farming communities to transfer production methods and modern agricultural technologies. In 2025 alone, close to 70 Burkinabe agricultural officials and technicians traveled to China for advanced training. They studied food security systems, crop preservation, agricultural processing, cotton cultivation, and Junkao technology, which is used to improve agricultural productivity and livestock support. This approach reflects a very different philosophy from emergency food assistance. Emergency aid may help populations survive temporary crises, but it does not necessarily create self-sufficiency. China appears to be focusing instead on helping Burkina Faso produce more food independently over time. That includes training local experts, modernizing farming methods, improving irrigation systems, and expanding mechanized agriculture. In practical terms, this means Burkina Faso is not only receiving tractors and fertilizer, it is also receiving technical knowledge, operational skills, and production strategies that could continue functioning long after the original equipment is delivered. For many supporters of this partnership, that is the most important aspect. Because teaching a country how to strengthen its own agricultural system may ultimately be more valuable than any short-term financial donation. And for a region facing food insecurity, climate pressure, and instability, long-term productive capacity may become one of the most powerful forms of national defense. The food crisis across the Sahel has become one of the defining challenges of the region. And for Burkina Faso, agriculture is no longer simply about economic development. It is increasingly tied to national stability itself. For years, countries across the Sahel have faced a dangerous combination of insecurity, climate pressure, rising food prices, and rural displacement. Armed violence forced many farmers away from their land. Droughts reduced harvests. Entire communities struggled to maintain basic agricultural production. In Burkina Faso, some fertile areas became difficult to cultivate because of insecurity. Young people increasingly left rural regions searching for work elsewhere. Meanwhile, dependence on imported food continued to grow, leaving the country vulnerable to global price shocks and supply disruptions. That is why the government now sees agricultural modernization as a strategic necessity. Mechanization plays a major role in that strategy. In many villages, farming is still done largely by hand or with animal traction. Preparing land can take weeks. Harvesting is slow. Crop losses remain high. Productivity stays limited even when farmers work extremely hard. Modern equipment changes that equation. A tractor can prepare larger fields much faster. Seeders improve planting efficiency. Better harvesting and processing equipment reduces waste. Improved seeds and fertilizers increase yields even under difficult climate conditions. But beyond economics, there is also a deeper social impact. If agriculture becomes more productive, rural communities become more stable. Young workers may choose to remain in farming instead of leaving. Food prices become more manageable. Governments reduce pressure on imports and emergency aid. This is why some observers believe the real battle for the Sahel may not ultimately be fought only with weapons. It may also be fought with food production, water systems, agricultural technology, and the ability of nations to feed their own populations under difficult conditions. As China deepens its agricultural partnership with Burkina Faso, reactions from parts of the Western world have become increasingly divided. Some analysts argue that Beijing is not simply helping African agriculture. They believe China is expanding long-term geopolitical influence across the Sahel through infrastructure, technology, and economic partnerships. Critics often claim that African countries could become too dependent on Chinese financing, equipment, or technical systems. Others worry that China's growing presence may weaken Western influence in a region already experiencing major political shifts. But supporters of Burkina Faso's current strategy respond with a simple question. If a partnership helps farmers increase production, creates jobs, expands irrigation, modernizes agriculture, and strengthens food security, why should African nations refuse it? For many ordinary people in Burkina Faso, geopolitical debates matter less than practical results. Farmers want functioning equipment. Communities want stable food supplies. Young people want economic opportunities close to home. And this is where the debate becomes more complicated. Because Burkina Faso is not necessarily trying to replace one foreign influence with another. Instead, country appears to be diversifying its international partnerships at a time when many African governments are searching for alternatives to older dependency models. That trend is becoming increasingly visible across parts of West Africa. Countries are looking for investment, technology transfer, infrastructure, and industrial cooperation, rather than relying entirely on humanitarian assistance. In that environment, China has positioned itself as a partner focused heavily on production and development projects. Whether this strategy will fully succeed remains uncertain, but one thing is already clear. The political conversation in Africa is changing. More nations are asking how they can build stronger internal economies, reduce vulnerability to external pressure, and gain greater control over food, energy, and strategic resources in the decades ahead. What is happening today in Burkina Faso may offer an important lesson not only for the Sahel, but for many African nations searching for a new path towards stability and independence. For decades, large parts of Africa remained trapped in a difficult cycle. Many countries exported raw materials while importing expensive food products. Agricultural systems stayed underdeveloped. Rural communities lacked irrigation, storage infrastructure, modern machinery, and technical support. As a result, food insecurity continued even in regions with enormous farming potential. Burkina Faso now appears to be trying a different model. Instead of relying entirely on emergency assistance, the country is attempting to strengthen local production capacity. That means investing in tractors, seed technology, irrigation systems, agricultural training, and food processing infrastructure. It also means treating agriculture not as a secondary issue, but as one of the foundations of national resilience. This is one reason why the partnership with China has attracted attention across Africa. Supporters believe the long-term objective is not simply to receive aid. The goal is to help Burkina Faso feed itself, stabilize rural communities, create jobs, and reduce dependence on outside powers. Major obstacles still remain. Security problems continue across parts of the country. Climate conditions remain difficult. Agricultural modernization takes time, resources, and political stability. No foreign partnership alone can solve every structural challenge facing the Sahel. But many Africans are watching Burkina Faso closely because they believe something larger may be developing beneath the surface. They see a country trying to reclaim economic direction through production instead of dependency. And that is where the message of Captain IbrahimTraore connects strongly with modern Pan-African thinking across the continent. For many supporters of Pan-Africanism, sovereignty is not measured only by speeches at the African Union. It is measured by whether a nation can feed its people, support its farmers, develop local industries, and protect national dignity. Perhaps that is why this story matters far beyond 160 million CFA francs. Because the future of Burkina Faso, and perhaps part of the Africa new generation of leadership, may not begin inside presidential palaces. It may begin in the rice fields, irrigation canals, and farming villages where Ibrahim Traore hopes to build a more self-reliant future. If you believe Africa's future will be shaped by production, dignity, and self-reliance, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. In the vast and unforgiving Sahel, where drought, food shortages, and economic hardship have challenged generations, a remarkable story is unfolding. It is not taking place in a major industrial city. It is not driven by billion-dollar corporations. Instead, it is happening on the calm waters of a reservoir in Burkina Faso, where thousands of fish are transforming the future of an entire nation. Just a few months ago, the fish released into floating cages at the Samandeni Reservoir weighed only a few grams. Few people expected anything extraordinary. Many assumed it would be another agricultural experiment that produced modest results and eventually faded from public attention. Yet what happened next surprised farmers, technicians, government officials, and even experienced observers of African agriculture. In only about 4 months, some of those fish had grown to nearly 1 kilogram. The first harvest produced tons of fish, creating a result that many believed would require years to achieve. At a time when many African countries continue to depend heavily on imported food, Burkina Faso suddenly found itself attracting attention for a completely different reason. It was producing real food, creating real jobs, and generating real income. The significance of this achievement goes far beyond aquaculture. For years, Burkina Faso faced serious challenges related to food security. Climate pressures reduced agricultural productivity in many regions. Security challenges displaced communities and disrupted traditional livelihoods. At the same time, demand for affordable protein continued to grow. Fish consumption remained important, yet much of the supply came from outside the country. Against this backdrop, a simple question emerged. What if one of Burkina Faso's greatest resources had been overlooked all along? Ibrahim Traore and his government began looking at the country's reservoirs not merely as sources of irrigation water, but as untapped economic assets capable of helping feed the nation. The decision itself was surprisingly simple. Instead of investing years and enormous sums of money into building entirely new food production systems, the government chose to use something Burkina Faso already possessed. Across the country stood reservoirs and dams originally built for irrigation and water management. Among them, Samandeni was one of the largest and most important. For decades, most people viewed the reservoir through a narrow lens. It stored water, it supported agriculture, it helped local communities survive dry seasons. Yet, Ibrahim Traore's administration saw another possibility hidden in plain sight. What if these vast bodies of water could become engines of food production? That question led to one of the most ambitious aquaculture initiatives the country had ever attempted. Rather than relying on traditional fish ponds that require large areas of land and significant water management, officials promoted floating cage farming. The approach was practical, relatively affordable, and capable of producing fish at a scale that conventional methods struggled to match. The choice of tilapia was equally strategic. Tilapia is known throughout Africa for its resilience, rapid growth, and ability to adapt to different environmental conditions. It is popular among consumers, relatively affordable to raise, and capable of reaching market size quickly when managed properly. For a country seeking faster results in its fight for food security, it was an ideal candidate. What makes this story especially important is that it reflects a broader development philosophy that has become closely associated with Ibrahim Traore. Instead of focusing first on external solutions, the emphasis has increasingly been placed on domestic resources, existing infrastructure, Local labor, available water, and national expertise are treated as assets rather than limitations. In many countries, development plans spend years moving through studies, consultations, and funding negotiations before citizens see tangible results. At Samandeni, the objective was different. The goal was action. The reservoir was already there. The water was already there. The demand for fish already existed. What remained was the willingness to connect those pieces and move quickly. Within months, that decision would begin producing results that few could ignore. What happened next turned a local agricultural project into a national talking point. When the first cages were stocked, expectations were cautious. Fish fingerlings weighing only 2 or 3 grams were introduced into the floating enclosures. Farmers hoped for decent growth. Technicians expected encouraging results. Few imagined they were about to witness one of the fastest production cycles seen in the country's aquaculture sector. As the weeks passed, the numbers became increasingly difficult to ignore. The fish were growing at an exceptional rate. By the time the first harvest arrived, many tilapia had reached between 700 grams and 1 kilogram in weight. For experienced fish farmers, this was remarkable. In many conventional systems, reaching similar sizes can take 8 months, 10 months, or even longer depending on conditions and management practices. The first official harvest at Samandeni provided the proof everyone had been waiting for. Approximately 15 tons of fish were collected during the initial harvesting operations. Some individual cages produced between 4 and 5 tons of fish. What began as an experiment was suddenly generating commercial-scale results. The reaction from participants was immediate. Farmers who had invested their time and effort expressed surprise at the speed of growth. Technicians monitoring the project described the outcomes as better than anticipated. Government representatives visiting the site pointed to the harvest as evidence that the country's food production strategy was beginning to move beyond speeches and into measurable achievements. One reason for the success appears to have been the quality of the water itself. Experts observed that the reservoir provided favorable conditions for fish development. Natural nutrients present in the water helped support growth, while the cage system allowed farmers to manage production more efficiently than many traditional approaches. Perhaps the most important aspect of the harvest was psychological rather than technical. Citizens did not hear about projected results years into the future. They saw fish being harvested. They saw trucks transporting production. They saw workers earning incomes. In a region often associated with scarcity, the images coming from Samandeni told a very different story. For many observers, the message was simple. This was no longer a promise. It was a result. The success of the first harvest was impressive, but the true significance of the project became clearer when its impact on ordinary people began to emerge. Fish farming at Samandeni was not simply producing food. It was creating opportunities in communities that had spent years facing economic uncertainty. Across Burkina Faso, many young people struggle to find stable employment. In rural areas, opportunities are often limited, especially for those who have completed technical training but cannot find work related to their skills. The floating cage project started to change that reality. Technicians, farm workers, transport operators, fish handlers, and support staff all became part of a growing value chain centered around aquaculture. For some participants, the project represented more than a job. It represented a second chance. Security challenges in various parts of the country had forced many families to leave their homes and traditional occupations. Some individuals who once depended on farming or fishing in other regions found new livelihoods around the reservoirs. Instead of remaining dependent on assistance, they became active contributors to a productive industry. Women also played an important role in the initiative. Entrepreneurs such as Madame Cabaret became symbols of what was possible when access to resources, training, and opportunity were combined. Her successful harvest demonstrated that aquaculture could become a profitable activity for individuals willing to invest effort and commitment. Behind every ton of harvested fish were dozens of personal stories. There were students gaining practical experience. There were workers supporting their families with new incomes. There were small business owners finding opportunities in transportation, distribution, and fish sales. These human stories often receive less attention than production figures, yet they reveal the true value of development. A successful project is not measured only by output. It is measured by the number of lives it improves. At Samandeni, the harvest was not only taking fish out of the water, it was bringing hope, dignity, and economic opportunity into communities that needed them most. The question many observers began asking was straightforward. If the results were so impressive, why had similar breakthroughs not occurred years earlier? The answer reveals one of the most important lessons behind the success of the Samandeni project. In many countries, agricultural programs focus heavily on production while paying far less attention to everything that comes afterward. Farmers may receive equipment or training, but they are often left to solve the most difficult challenges on their own. They must find financing. They must secure feed. They must locate buyers. They must transport products to market. When one part of the chain fails, the entire project struggles. Burkina Faso approached the situation differently. The floating cage initiative was supported through a broader system designed to address multiple obstacles simultaneously. Producers received access to cages, fingerlings, technical assistance, and feed support. Financial institutions and government-backed programs helped reduce some of the barriers that would normally prevent participation. Equally important was the effort to support market access. Officials understood that fish farmers could not continue production if they were unable to sell their harvest quickly. Buyers and distributors were encouraged to participate, creating a mechanism that allowed fish to move from the cages to consumers with greater efficiency. This reduced uncertainty and increased confidence among producers. The result was a functioning value chain rather than a standalone farming project. Every link supported the next. Production supported processing. Distribution supported production. Financing supported expansion. Instead of treating fish farming as an isolated activity, it became part of a coordinated economic strategy. This helps explain why progress appeared so rapid. The success was not the product of luck. It was not the result of a single harvest. It emerged from organization, planning, and execution. While many development initiatives spend years attempting to build momentum, Samandeni demonstrated what can happen when infrastructure, policy, financing, and market demand move in the same direction. That alignment may be the project's most valuable achievement of all. As news of the harvest spread, reactions began emerging both inside and outside Burkina Faso. Supporters viewed the project as proof that the country could reduce its dependence on imported food through practical action. Others were more cautious. Some observers questioned whether a successful harvest from a limited number of cages could truly transform a national food system. Others wondered whether such rapid growth could be maintained over the long term. These questions are reasonable. Every major agricultural project faces challenges. Fish farming requires careful management of water quality, feed supply, logistics, and environmental sustainability. No serious observer would claim that a single harvest has solved every food security problem facing Burkina Faso. Yet focusing only on potential risks misses an equally important reality. The fish were harvested, the jobs were created, the infrastructure was installed, the production cycle worked. What critics viewed as an ambitious experiment had already produced measurable results, whether one supports or opposes the government's broader policies. The outcomes at Samandeni cannot simply be dismissed as theory. More importantly, the project offers lessons that extend far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, countless reservoirs, dams, rivers, and agricultural assets remain underutilized. Many countries possess resources capable of supporting local food production, yet those resources often remain disconnected from investment, organization, and long-term planning. The story of Samandeni demonstrates that development does not always begin with massive financial resources. Sometimes it begins with a different way of looking at existing assets. A reservoir becomes a food production center. A fishing project becomes a source of employment. A local initiative becomes a national symbol. This is why the project resonates with many supporters of Pan-African development. The lesson is not simply about fish farming. The lesson is about self-reliance. It is about recognizing value where others see limitations. It is about creating solutions from local resources rather than waiting for solutions to arrive from elsewhere. For many Africans watching this story unfold, that may be the most powerful message of all. Looking back at the events of those remarkable 4 months, it becomes clear that the story unfolding at Samandeni is about far more than fish. It is a story about how a nation facing serious economic and food security challenges chose to act rather than wait. It is a story about seeing opportunity where others saw limitations. Most importantly, it is a story about turning existing resources into practical solutions that improve people's lives. The floating cages on the waters of Samandeni have become symbols of something much larger. They represent a belief that development does not always require enormous wealth or unlimited foreign assistance. Sometimes it begins with leadership, organization, and the determination to make better use of what already exists. A reservoir becomes a source of food. A local project becomes a national conversation. A simple idea becomes a pathway toward greater self-reliance. The achievement of producing significant quantities of fish in such a short period does not mean every challenge has been solved. Burkina Faso still faces important obstacles, and the long-term success of the project will depend on continued investment, management, and expansion. Yet the first results have already demonstrated that meaningful progress is possible. For many observers across Africa, the lesson is powerful. A country does not need to wait for perfect conditions before taking action. It can begin with the resources it already possesses and build momentum through practical achievements. As Burkina Faso continues this journey, the project stands as an example of Pan-African determination and innovation. From the waters of Samandeni to the broader vision of a stronger Burkina Faso, the message is becoming increasingly clear. Under the leadership of IbrahimTraore, new possibilities are emerging. The conversation about Africa New is no longer centered only on challenges, but also on solutions. For supporters of Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and those inspired by Captain IbrahimTraore, this story offers a glimpse of what can happen when a nation chooses self-reliance over dependency and action over hesitation. If you believe stories like this deserve greater attention, share your thoughts below and follow the channel for more stories about Burkina Faso, IbrahimTraore, and the future of a rising Africa. The world talks endlessly about climate change. Every year, new conferences are organized, new promises are made, and new reports are published. Yet, in many parts of the world, deserts continue to expand, and forests continue to disappear. Burkina Faso has chosen a different path. Instead of relying only on speeches and declarations, the country has launched an ambitious national campaign to restore its land. In 2023, Burkina Faso set a goal of planting 5 million trees. In 2024, that target increased to 6 million. By 2025, the country announced an even more ambitious objective of 20 million trees, with plans to expand the effort further in 2026. What makes this initiative unique is not only the number of trees being planted. Under the leadership of Captain IbrahimTraore, many of these trees are intended to serve a second purpose. They are expected to become living sources of medicine for communities across the country. This means the campaign is not only about fighting desertification, it is also about improving public health and restoring traditional African knowledge that has been passed down for generations. If you enjoy discovering real African success stories that rarely make international headlines, be sure to subscribe and join us for more. The urgency of this mission becomes clear when we examine the environmental situation facing Burkina Faso. Between 2000 and 2022, the country lost nearly 1.84 million hectares of forest. On average, around 83,000 hectares disappeared every year. Agriculture expansion, firewood harvesting, mining activities, population growth, uncontrolled grazing, and bushfires have all contributed to this decline. The consequences are serious. As forests disappear, soils become weaker, water becomes scarcer, and farming becomes more difficult. Across the Sahel region, desertification continues to threaten livelihoods and food security. For Burkina Faso, restoring trees is no longer an environmental choice. It has become a national necessity. By 2023, Burkina Faso had already begun to demonstrate that reforestation could become more than an annual environmental event. The country launched a national effort to plant 5 million trees, sending a message that restoring degraded land would become a long-term priority rather than a symbolic gesture. 1 year later, the ambition grew. In 2024, the target increased to 6 million trees. Authorities moved the National Tree Day celebration to June instead of August, so that young trees could benefit from the early rainy season and develop stronger roots before the long dry months arrived. This decision reflected a practical approach focused on survival rather than publicity. Then came an even more ambitious objective. For 2025, Burkina Faso announced a nationwide goal of planting 20 million trees. Within that campaign, one challenge attracted particular attention: planting 5 million trees in a single hour between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning during National Tree Day. What makes this campaign different is the scale of public participation. Artists, students, civil servants, local leaders, traditional authorities, religious figures, businesses, and ordinary citizens have all been encouraged to take part. Tree planting is no longer presented as a task reserved for environmental agencies. It is being promoted as a civic responsibility shared by the entire nation. Across the country, communities are creating small forests, roadside plantations, institutional woodlots, and medicinal gardens. The objective is not only to increase the number of trees, but also to create a national culture of environmental stewardship. For many observers, the most remarkable aspect of this movement is that it transforms reforestation into a popular cause. Instead of waiting for outside solutions, Burkina Faso is mobilizing its own people to restore its own land. That shift from dependence to participation may ultimately become one of the most important achievements of the entire campaign. One of the reasons IbrahimTraore's environmental strategy has attracted attention is that it challenges a common weakness found in many reforestation campaigns. Too often, success is measured by the number of trees planted rather than the number of trees that survive. Traore has repeatedly emphasized that planting a tree is only the beginning. A tree that dies after a few months contributes little to restoring the environment. For that reason, Burkina Faso is increasingly focusing on long-term care, monitoring, and community responsibility. In public speeches, he has warned against what could be called ceremonial reforestation. Planting thousands of trees for a single event may create impressive images, but without maintenance, irrigation, and protection, those efforts can quickly disappear. His message is simple: a planted tree must become a living tree. This philosophy has influenced the way many projects are organized. Local committees are being encouraged to monitor newly planted areas. Communities are expected to participate in maintenance. Some reforestation sites include water infrastructure and follow-up systems designed to improve survival rates during the dry season. The government has also promoted the mapping and identification of planting sites. Rather than treating reforestation as a one-day activity, authorities increasingly view it as a continuous process that requires planning and accountability. This approach helps explain why the campaign is gaining credibility among supporters. The objective is not merely to produce impressive statistics. The objective is to restore ecosystems that can survive for decades. For Ibrahim Traore, environmental success cannot be measured on the day a tree enters the ground. It must be measured years later when that tree is still providing shade, protecting soil, conserving water, and supporting the community around it. In that sense, caring for trees becomes a reflection of caring for the future itself. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of Burkina Faso's reforestation strategy is the decision to transform tree planting into a public health initiative. In 2025, the country introduced a new focus on medicinal plants through the creation of community medicinal groves. Rather than planting trees solely for environmental restoration, authorities began promoting species that could also provide health benefits for local populations. The idea is both simple and ambitious. Every province is expected to develop medicinal plant gardens, with the possibility of expanding the model to individual departments in the future. These spaces are designed to preserve valuable plant species while making traditional remedies more accessible to nearby communities. This approach is especially important in rural areas where access to healthcare services can be limited. Medicinal trees and plants have long played a role in African traditional medicine. By cultivating them systematically, Burkina Faso hopes to preserve knowledge that might otherwise disappear. Several native species are valued for their nutritional and medicinal properties. The baobab tree, for example, is known for its nutrient-rich fruit and leaves. Neem is widely recognized for its traditional medicinal uses and environmental resilience. Tamarind and other local species also provide benefits that extend beyond environmental restoration. The concept behind these medicinal groves goes far beyond healthcare. They also contribute to biodiversity conservation, carbon storage, soil protection, and climate resilience. A single tree can perform multiple functions within the community. This is why supporters often describe the initiative as creating living pharmacies. Instead of seeing trees only as environmental assets, Burkina Faso is treating them as resources that can support both human well-being and ecological recovery. In this model, every tree planted represents more than a contribution to a greener landscape. It becomes an investment in healthier communities, stronger local knowledge, and a more resilient future for generations to come. One of the deepest objectives behind Burkina Faso's tree planting campaign is not environmental restoration alone. It is also the recovery of knowledge that has been part of African societies for centuries. Long before the arrival of modern healthcare systems, communities across Africa relied on medicinal plants to treat illnesses, strengthen nutrition, and support daily well-being. This knowledge was passed from one generation to another and became an important part of cultural identity. Over time, however, much of this traditional knowledge began to lose visibility. Urbanization, modernization, and dependence on imported solutions often pushed local practices into the background. As a result, valuable experience accumulated over centuries risked being forgotten. IbrahimTraore has argued that protecting medicinal plants is also a way of protecting cultural heritage. In his view, traditional knowledge and modern science should not be seen as opponents. Instead, they can complement each other and provide communities with more options for maintaining their health. This perspective helps explain why medicinal groves occupy such an important place in the country's environmental strategy. They are not only collections of trees, they are living repositories of knowledge, memory, and practical experience. The concept also connects directly to the idea of health sovereignty. Communities that preserve local medicinal resources may become less vulnerable to supply disruptions and external dependence. While modern medicine remains essential, strengthening local capacities can improve resilience, especially in rural areas. Beyond healthcare, the initiative reinforces confidence in African solutions to African challenges. It demonstrates that development does not always require abandoning local traditions. Sometimes progress can emerge from rediscovering and improving knowledge that already exists. For many supporters, this combination of environmental protection, cultural revival, and public health represents one of the most distinctive aspects of Burkina Faso's current approach. It is an attempt to build the future without disconnecting from the wisdom of the past. As Burkina Faso's reforestation campaign gains visibility, it has also attracted skepticism from some international observers. Critics often question whether such ambitious targets can produce lasting results or whether they are primarily symbolic political initiatives. One common criticism is that planting millions of trees in a short period may create impressive headlines without guaranteeing long-term environmental benefits. History offers many examples of reforestation campaigns that generated large numbers but failed to achieve meaningful survival rates. Supporters of Burkina Faso's approach respond by pointing to an important difference. The current strategy places increasing emphasis on maintenance, monitoring, community involvement, and long-term stewardship. The objective is not simply to put trees in the ground, but to ensure that they continue growing years after they are planted. Another criticism concerns the focus on medicinal plants. Some observers worry that emphasizing traditional remedies could be interpreted as a rejection of modern healthcare systems. However, the stated objective is not to replace modern medicine. Rather, it is to preserve useful local knowledge while allowing traditional and modern approaches to coexist. Supporters argue that communities benefit when they have access to multiple sources of healthcare and knowledge. A broader debate centers on the idea of development itself. Burkina Faso's strategy reflects a belief that local resources, local knowledge, and local participation should play a central role in solving national challenges. Some critics view this approach with caution, while supporters see it as a necessary step toward greater self-reliance. Regardless of political perspectives, one fact remains difficult to ignore. Burkina Faso is attempting to address environmental degradation, public health, and cultural preservation through a single integrated strategy. The ultimate judgment will not come from speeches or headlines. It will come from the condition of the land, the survival of the trees, and the impact these efforts have on future generations. Burkina Faso's campaign began as a response to environmental decline, but it has evolved into something much larger. What started as an effort to fight desertification is becoming a broader vision for national renewal. The country moved from planting 5 million trees in 2023 to 6 million in 2024 and announced a target of 20 million trees in 2025. Yet the most important achievement may not be the numbers themselves. It is the attempt to connect environmental restoration with public health, cultural identity, and community participation. Through the creation of medicinal groves, Burkina Faso is demonstrating that a tree can serve many purposes. It can protect soil, improve water retention, support biodiversity, store carbon, and provide valuable medicinal resources for local communities. The experience also offers lessons for other African countries. Sustainable progress does not always begin with large budgets or foreign solutions. Sometimes it begins with local resources, local knowledge, and citizens willing to contribute to a shared national goal. Whether every target is achieved remains to be seen. Long-term success will depend on maintenance, community commitment, and the survival of the trees that have been planted. However, one message is already clear. Burkina Faso is trying to build solutions from within. For supporters of Pan-African development, this effort reflects growing confidence in local capacities. As discussions about Africa new development models continue, figures such as Captain IbrahimTraore and Ibrahim Traore remain central to debates about the future. Whether viewed through the lens of Pan-Africanism or the African Union, this story highlights a path that many across Burkina Faso and Africa will continue to watch closely. If stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. What happens when one of Africa's poorest nations begins building infrastructure at a speed that captures attention across the continent for many years? African countries have faced a familiar challenge. Roads are announced, projects are launched, and budgets are allocated. Yet, visible results often take years to appear. Delays, funding shortages, and dependence on outside support have slowed progress in many places. Today, Burkina Faso is trying a different approach. Across cities such as Bobo Dioulasso and Koudougou, new roads, pavements, and public works are emerging through the Faso Mebo initiative. Backed by the vision of Captain IbrahimTraore, the program aims to mobilize local skills, local resources, and community participation to accelerate development. What makes this effort remarkable is not simply the construction itself. It is the fact that citizens can see tangible changes within months rather than years. For many people, development is no longer a promise for the future. It is becoming part of daily life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel for more stories about Burkina Faso's transformation and Africa's future. The first thing that surprises many observers is the speed of change. In Koudougou, more than 200,000 square meters of paving stones were installed within just a few months. Streets once covered in dust have become cleaner and easier to use. Similar improvements are appearing in other locations as well. This progress is attracting attention because many infrastructure projects across Africa often require much longer timelines before citizens notice meaningful results. Burkina Faso still faces significant economic and security challenges. Yet, despite those difficulties, Faso Mebo is demonstrating that rapid action is possible. And that raises an important question. Could this be the beginning of a new model of African development built on action rather than waiting? What truly makes Faso Mebo different is that it is not simply building roads. It is attempting to build national capacity at the same time. In many developing countries, infrastructure projects depend heavily on foreign contractors, imported expertise, and external funding. While such partnerships can deliver results, they often leave local communities with limited involvement in the actual construction process. Faso Mebo is trying a different path. Across Burkina Faso, engineers, technicians, local businesses, volunteers, students, and members of the armed forces have all participated in various projects. The objective is not only to complete infrastructure, but also to strengthen the country's ability to build and maintain that infrastructure in the future. This approach has been particularly visible in cities such as Koudougou. Community members have contributed labor, businesses have supplied materials, and volunteers have supported construction activities. Rather than standing on the sidelines, citizens have become active participants in the development process. The involvement of local companies is also significant, by relying more heavily on domestic suppliers and workers. A larger share of project spending remains within the national economy. This creates opportunities for employment, skills development, and business growth. Another important element is the participation of the military. Beyond their traditional responsibilities, military personnel have joined certain development efforts, reinforcing the message that national progress is a responsibility shared by all sectors of society. So, for many supporters of Faso Mebo, the most important achievement is not the pavement itself. It is the growing belief that Burkinabe citizens can solve major challenges through their own effort and cooperation. That sense of ownership may prove just as valuable as any road, bridge, or public facility built through the program. If sustained over time, it could help create a stronger foundation for future development across the country. One reason Faso Mebo is attracting attention across Africa is that Burkina Faso is not relying only on traditional construction methods. The country is also experimenting with technical solutions designed for its specific environmental conditions. This is particularly important because Burkina Faso faces some of the toughest challenges for road infrastructure. During the dry season, temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius. During the rainy season, heavy downpours can quickly damage poorly constructed roads. These conditions have shortened the lifespan of many infrastructure projects across the region. To address these challenges, Faso Mebo has been testing improved construction techniques in Bobo Dioulasso. Engineers have worked with stabilized soil foundations, reinforced base layers, and semi-graded asphalt concrete designed to withstand both heavy traffic and harsh weather conditions. What makes this process noteworthy is the attention given to preparation before the final road surface is applied. Construction teams first clean and prepare the site. The ground is then strengthened using soil mixed with cement. After that, technical inspections are conducted to verify that the foundation can support the expected load. Only after those evaluations are completed does the project move to the next stage. This approach reflects a broader change in thinking. The objective is no longer simply to build roads as quickly as possible. The goal is to build roads that remain functional for many years, despite extreme heat, seasonal flooding, and increasing transportation demands. For Burkina Faso, this represents an important shift. Infrastructure is being treated not as a short-term achievement, but as a long-term investment. If these technologies continue to perform well, they could provide valuable lessons for other African countries facing similar environmental conditions. In the end, durability may become just as important as speed. A road that lasts for decades can create far greater value than one that must be rebuilt every few years. Rapid construction often raises an important question. Can quality keep pace with speed? This is one of the most common concerns raised whenever large infrastructure projects move quickly. Supporters may celebrate visible progress, but engineers know that long-term success depends on what lies beneath the surface. According to reports from Faso Mebo project sites, quality control has become a central part of the construction process. Before a road advances from one stage to another, technical teams perform a series of inspections designed to verify that each layer meets required standards. The process begins with site preparation and foundation work. Materials are carefully placed and compacted before engineers conduct geotechnical evaluations. These tests help determine whether the ground can safely support future traffic loads. Laboratory specialists also play an important role. Their responsibility is to examine construction materials, verify technical specifications, and identify potential weaknesses before they become costly problems. Rather than treating inspections as a final formality, the testing process is integrated throughout the project. This approach is particularly significant because road failures are often caused by problems that cannot be seen from the surface. A road may appear finished and attractive, but if the foundation is weak, cracks, sinking, and deterioration can emerge after only a few rainy seasons. Faso Mebo is attempting to avoid that outcome by combining speed with technical discipline. Every successful inspection creates confidence that the next construction phase can proceed safely. Of course, the true test will come over time. The durability of these roads will ultimately determine whether the model achieves its long-term objectives. However, the emphasis on geotechnical testing and quality assurance demonstrates that project leaders understand the importance of building infrastructure that lasts. For many observers, this may be one of the most encouraging aspects of the initiative. Fast development attracts attention, but reliable infrastructure earns trust. Burkina Faso is now attempting to achieve both at the same time. Behind many of the visible changes taking place in Burkina Faso stands a broader vision promoted by Captain IbrahimTraore. While roads and infrastructure are the most visible outcomes, supporters argue that the real transformation is happening at the level of national thinking. For decades, many African countries have relied heavily on external financing, foreign contractors, and imported expertise to carry out major development projects. Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly emphasized a different idea. He argues that lasting progress requires countries to strengthen their own capacity to design, build, and maintain critical infrastructure. This philosophy is reflected throughout the Faso Mebo initiative. Local engineers are given greater responsibility. Domestic companies are encouraged to participate. Communities contribute labor and resources. Even members of the armed forces have joined development efforts in some regions. The objective extends beyond completing individual projects. The larger goal is to create a culture of self-reliance and national participation. This message has resonated with many citizens. In communities where people can directly observe new roads, public works, and urban improvements, infrastructure has become a visible symbol of national progress. Instead of waiting for change to arrive from outside, many people now feel they are helping create that change themselves. Supporters of the initiative often point to this shift in mindset as one of its greatest achievements. A road can improve transportation, but confidence in a nation's abilities can influence generations. At the same time, long-term success will depend on results. Citizens will ultimately judge the vision by the durability of projects, economic benefits, and continued improvements in daily life. Nevertheless, the influence of Ibrahim Traore on this movement is difficult to ignore. For many Burkinabe, Faso Mebo represents more than construction. It represents a belief that national development should be driven first by the energy, skills, and determination of the people themselves. Not everyone views Faso Mebo through the same lens. As the initiative has gained attention across Africa, it has also attracted criticism from some international observers and analysts. One common concern is sustainability. Critics argue that rapid infrastructure expansion may become difficult to maintain over the long term, especially in a country facing economic and security challenges. Others question whether local resources alone can support large-scale development projects for many years. Another criticism focuses on quality. Some observers worry that projects completed quickly could face durability problems in the future. Others suggest that public attention surrounding Faso Mebo may be growing faster than the evidence needed to measure its long-term impact. These concerns deserve consideration. Every major infrastructure program should be evaluated carefully, and long-term success can only be measured over time. However, supporters of Faso Mebo point to several important facts. Roads, pavements, and public works are being completed and used by citizens today. Technical inspections, geotechnical testing, and quality control procedures have been incorporated into the construction process. The initiative is also generating practical experience for local engineers, workers, and businesses. From this perspective, the debate should not focus only on predictions. It should also consider visible results already achieved on the ground. Perhaps the most important lesson is that development should ultimately be judged by outcomes rather than assumptions. If infrastructure remains durable and continues to improve economic activity, the initiative will strengthen its credibility. If weaknesses emerge, adjustments can be made. For now, Faso Mebo remains an ongoing experiment in national development. It is challenging traditional assumptions about how African countries can build infrastructure, mobilize communities, and increase